10 PBTA TTRPG tips and D&D 2, I guess. First and foremost, the disclosure. Do what works for you and your group. For the past 10 years, I've been running and playing in Dungeons & Dragons games, 5e, but for the past 2 years, I've been running PBTA games exclusively. Tip number 1. It's all about the players. What do they want to play? My group personally likes leveling up, making choices, and goofing off, so I take their wants and their needs into account when I create the stories that I want to tell. Which brings us over to tip number 2. It's about you too. It's about the GM. What type of story do I want to tell? I like telling stories that are centered around characters, like specifically my player characters. I love making jokes with the party and telling stories that are intimate rather than geopolitical, government, high fantasy, epic fantasy, Brandon Sanderson type of things. Tip number 3 is about meshing my expectations and my players' expectations. I communicate openly with the type of stories and the type of games and systems that I like to run and why I want to run them. And they're down to try things that are new and interesting. They still think that D&D 5e is the peak and pinnacle of everything, but they do love playing my games, and I love being able to DM them. And at any time, they can pick up the mantle of DM and run a 5e, and I'll play with them. But that hasn't happened in about a year. Tip number 4. If you're playing a PBTA game, you can probably prep in about 30 minutes. Seriously, it comes down to only doing 3 things. And that's resolving the last session's mischief, inciting today's incident, and then revealing and advancing the doomsday clock. Tip number 5, resolving last session's mischief. This comes down to recapping what happened last session, filling any void that was left or any unfinished business, and then moving them on to a new scene where they can pick up from and have the inciting incident happen. So let's say, for example, they learned about where the bad guy's base location was last session. You can go there directly and skipping any of the pre-filter nonsense and get directly into the action. Tip number 6, incite the incident. If you know what your party was going to do last session, then you can just prepare for that this session. Your party's going to do whatever they want to do, but having that prepped in advance just helps. If they learned about the big bad base location, you can prep what happens inside, what location, people, obstacles, treasures, and information they'll get out of that place. On the flip side, if this is the first session, or if they've made no indication on what they were going to do, just throw them into a mall that has a bomb threat. Make something that they have to deal with immediately. You can start out slow and do with their every daily routine, and then make something that incites an instance to act. So that way your players can act on new information. If you don't give them anything and you're waiting for your players to do anything, that will lead to a boring session. Tip number 7, reveal and advance the doomsday clock. So revealing and advancing the doomsday clock is vastly important for foreshadowing and for making it seem like something is happening in the background. So for each one of my player characters, I have a big bad evil that is happening. So I think of one thing that the bad guys want to do. I create a way for my players to visibly see that and for them to be able to act on that information. If you don't show them what is happening and they can't act on it, then when the big bad shows up and says, "Ha ha, I'm the big bad evil dude," and your entire party is like, "Who are you?" That's a poorly written villain. So if you drop hints and you drop little things every session to get them closer to finding out different answers, or just show them entirely what the big bad is capable of before the final showdown, that gives your players something to work towards. For example, the big bads are making super soldiers in the base location, and they're making them so they can defeat the alien invasion that is coming. So I give that information to the players in a form of an encrypted note that they need to take home and decrypt, basically a delaying status. So that way, right when the session is about to end, I can go beep bleep, decryption complete. Aliens are invading soon. And that's where we'll end tonight's session. Some teasers, some cliffhangers to make it so that the plot is moving forward and the big bad is coming. Tip number 8, manipulate the system to fit you. If the system has features that you're not using, you don't need to force them. And if you think that they're interesting, you can talk with your group about using those features and if you should or should not focus on them. Particularly in masks, my players don't want to be teenagers again. They already went through puberty once, they don't want to go through it again. So some of the influence mechanics that I was running, I would put blockers in their way and obstacles that were people that would try and influence them in certain ways. And that didn't work out very well. So instead of planning moments of force to use that mechanics, now I invoke the mechanic whenever I think it naturally comes up. And instead of rules as written where every adult might have influence over the player, if someone of importance that might not be an adult, but might be a sibling that may or may not have mechanically influence over them, I make the mechanic work like that. So that way it'll come up naturally and it will happen naturally and it will feel better for my players to run. Tip number 9, take an improv class. Taking an improv class will teach you how to play by the rules of improv and to tell a story without telling dice. So I've been taking and taught improv classes for 3 years. I've GM'd for 10 years off and on. And the dichotomy between before improv classes and after improv classes is night and day difference. I'm able to sit down with no prep and confidently tell a story with other people, as long as I know the rules for whatever system that they're using. Now, not everyone is able to take improv classes locally where there are. So there are online improv classes, and there are communities of improv enthusiasts that might be doing free classes. So take a look out for any of those type of groups. And finally, tip number 10, say yes to your players' ideas. This goes along with taking improv classes, is whenever my players have something funny, interesting, or dynamic and dramatic to say, I will make it reality. So there was one example where my player Michael was asked, hey, what college club are you in? And he said, the board game club. So we put him into the board game club and we asked him, what game are you playing? And he says, well, we're playing D&D. So I immediately was like, yes, you're playing D&D. You other 2 players that aren't in this scene, we're going to drag you into this scene by making you play other characters with no superpowers that are just playing D&D as friends. So one of the other players made a joke that he was really young because all of the other college students thought that Michael was weird. And I said, yes, you're 12. And so Michael and his 3 12-year-old friends are playing D&D on a college campus. And Michael is still laughing about it to this day. Say yes to your players' ideas. And also say yes to their drama and mystery ideas. Sometimes I have something that's going on and it's like, ooh, who's this evil bad guy behind this door number 2? And they said, well, it's probably my ex-dad because he's the big bad evil dude. I rip up the character sheet for the rat that I was going to have behind the door and I said, yes, that's what it is. So I hope those 10 tips helped. Bye.